Okay, the chain is sent.
I'm just doing a ballot check. Lakeville's affirming on speaking first.
Yep.
Cool.
I guess, could you drop your case in the email chain?
Yeah. Again, I can send it right before I'm about to go.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Yeah. And can you all send full speech dikes as well then?
Yeah, right before I speak as well.
Okay. All right. Everyone ready here? I can drop the case in. That's all good.
Give me 1 second. I'm good.
Okay. The F is sent, so once everyone has got it, I can go.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Is anyone not ready then? All right, let's begin. We affirm in contention 1 as Iran. Current surveillance is eating away government resources, as Gore 13 explains. With the government monitoring everything its citizenry does, the trillions of bits of information that the NSA is gathering could become an avalanche out of control. That spreads to all intelligence, risking miscalculation. As Young 19 explains, excessive information leads to overload, impairing the analyst's ability to pick out what is important. They further, the United States shares intelligence with militaries across the globe. A faulty intelligence leads Israel to believe Iran intends to use a nuclear weapon against Israel. Israel will carry out an airstrike on nuclear facilities. That escalation will be devastating, as Source 13 quantifies an Israeli attack on Tehran would kill 7 million people. Contention 2 is European data. NSA surveillance has killed data sharing with the European Union. As Vincent 20 explains, the European Union's top court has invalidated a data sharing protocol that allows American companies to transfer information about EU citizens to the US for processing, as it does not protect EU citizens from the NSA. Affirming solves by forcing the NSA to end foreign surveillance. As Bell 17 explains, American communications are inevitably caught up in the process of spying on foreigners. Non-target communications are 10 times more likely to be sucked up than target communications. This is the only way to solve, as Lomas 20 explains. The EU will not change its fundamental rights to please the NSA. The only way to overcome this clash is for the US to introduce solid privacy rights for all people. The impact of rare disease treatment, as Castro 20 explains, barriers to the exchange of personal medical data could prevent biopharmaceutical firms from conducting and aggregating data from clinical trials in order to get enough of the right candidates to make progress on rare diseases. This is critical, as The Lancet in 2019 explains. Rare diseases affect more than 300 million people worldwide, and of diseases affecting children, 30% will die. Contention 3 is Bitcoin. As Rosenbaum 20 explains, the biggest opportunity for cryptocurrencies will be in countries where there are underbanked individuals, especially in emerging markets. Large global institutions are moving along the adoption curve. Central banks continue to push forward with central bank digital currencies. However, the NSA monitors Bitcoin. As Alexandria 18 explains, the NSA is processing internet traffic to monitor cryptocurrencies when investigating U.S. citizens. They will use this power to destroy the currency before it grows. As Miller 17 explains, the NSA has plenty of computing power to take the blockchain down, and there are many scenarios that could lead to an order to destroy Bitcoin, as Bitcoin is handy for evading rules and taxes. That hurts countries with unstable currencies. As Callahan 19 explains, currencies in developing nations are influenced heavily by economic change, causing high inflation. By adopting Bitcoin, they immediately won't be influenced by changes within their specific economy, because Bitcoin operates on a global platform. That helps millions, as the United Nations in 2020 quantifies. 183 million people are living on the verge of slipping into acute hunger if hit with a shock. Contention 4 is quantum encryption. Quantum computing is a looming threat, as Norris20 explains. If hackers are able to crack cryptography, all information could be compromised. Post-quantum cryptography is the best solution. It's just a matter of getting it done in time. The longer that cryptography is not in place, the greater amount of information that is at risk. Surveillance undermines this in two ways. First, backdoors. As Men20 explains, NSA agreements with companies build backdoors to scan large amounts of traffic. It's only a matter of time before hackers exploit them. Second, through undermining standards. As Landau14 explains, the NSA's subversion of the NIST's widely used cryptography algorithm makes communications insecure, and it is likely to have serious effects on global cybersecurity since NIST is solely responsible for standards for the private sector. The threat is urgent. As Todsky20 explains, cyber attacks will increase exponentially with quantum computers. Broken cryptography could wreak hack on an infrastructure. That means economic shocks. As Basani18 explains, cybersecurity threats have become the most important threat to financial stability. A large-scale incident could disrupt financial companies and markets. And Evans09 quantifies the 08 global recession pushed 90 million people into extreme poverty. Contention 5 is internet freedom. Democracy is backsliding. As Rapucci20 explains, 2019 was the 14th year of decline in global freedom. Protest movements have confronted deeply entrenched pressure and deadly force. Domestic and surveillance has enabled this by removing U.S. leverage. As Kell14 explains, the NSA has been eroding the moral high ground that the United States has relied upon when putting pressure on authoritarian countries to change their behavior. The diminished ability to criticize surveillance opens the door for leaders to expand their own efforts. Promoting internet freedom spreads democracy. As Fontaine11 explains, an open internet can help countries slide towards democracy by organizing protests and spreading information. The impact is minimizing proxy wars. Rapucci furthers, a lack of leadership from democracies has encouraged authoritarian powers to engage in devastating proxy wars, and Sturman18 quantifies, proxy warfare in the Middle East and South Asia has displaced tens of millions and killed hundreds of thousands. That's what from.
Cool. My pen ran out of ink in the middle of the speech, so I'm going to quickly go grab one. All right. All right. Just sent it on the email chain. Lakeville, did you guys get it?
I have not yet.
Okay.
But maybe I just got it. Yeah, I just got it.
All right, cool. All the judges good? All right, cool. We negate our first contention is cyber defense. The NSA's key to stopping the growing threat of cyber attacks is first is because of attribution. Mayor 15 writes that the NSA uses surveillance to attribute a cybersecurity threat to another nation. This attribution is key to deter major attacks. Lindsay 15 writes that cyber attackers intentionally keep costs below the threshold of retaliation. Second is artificial intelligence. The NSA is working with the Pentagon on developing a security bot using AI to prevent cyber attacks. Corrigan 19 writes that officials are developing a newly minted AI center, creating a framework for the military cybersecurity data, which will lay the foundation for AI-powered cyber defense tools to ultimately train AI to monitor military networks for potential threats. Once developed, this AI will be crucial in identifying and stopping attacks. As Siegel 20 writes that AI and threat intelligence can recognize patterns in data to enable security systems to reduce incident response times and comply with security best practices. AI can result in a 100% threat detection rate that might signal an unknown attack. These two reasons are key to stopping cyber attacks. Roman 13 writes that cyber attacks are evolving with cyber criminals developing an increasingly sophisticated black market of tools and services to target organization. Cyber criminals are setting their sights on the financial market. As Fuchs 20 writes, since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a 238% increase in cyber attacks against banks, and banks are 300% more likely to be attacked than other sectors. The NSA is key to protecting these markets. Nakashima 19 writes that the DHS has begun working with the NSA to identify specific systems within the banking sector that are most vulnerable to hacking so the agencies can keep an eye out for them. This is crucial because a major cyber attack on financial markets is devastating. As Pisani 18 writes, that a large-scale cyber attack could disrupt the operations of financial markets and spread to the entire system, threatening financial stability and the broader economy. And because of global interconnectedness, Bradford 13 writes that as many as 900 million people could fall back into poverty in the event of an economic shock. Our second contention is circumvention. The U.S. has strong ties to mass surveillance, as Beans 20 writes that the history of mass surveillance in the U.S. runs deep. The American government has chosen to let mass surveillance continue and typically justifies it by pointing to the prevention of terrorism, crime, and child pornography, even if these aren't the real reason. The government will always do mass surveillance because of the military-industrial complex. Marshall 20 writes that defense industry profits are deployed strategically to build support for a highly militarized form of U.S. foreign policy. The industry has become unassailable and immune to the demands for tight belting or rationalization. Historically, this is tied to surveillance policies, as PI 17 writes that intelligence and security agencies have a close and established ally, the war profiteers, accustomed to seizing as much as public money as possible from the military through lobbying and revolving doors with public servants. Private contractors have now embedded themselves so deep into the national security state. Government restrictions lead to a private sector fill-in, as Priest 13 writes that the reliance on contractors reflects a massive shift towards outsourcing over the last 15 years because of cutbacks in government agencies and commitments to smaller governments. Historically, this is proven. Litaru 19 writes that rather than exclusively using federal employees to acquire content, the government heavily relies on outsourcing its collection efforts to federal contractors. Federal agencies that are more heavily restricted in their lawful ability to collect social media, data broker files, and other open sources have historically turned to private companies to conduct that surveillance on their behalf, legally laundering their results. Two impacts. First is cyber. Williams 19 writes that contractors routinely fail to secure the Defense Department's unclassified information from cyber threats when it's housed their systems and networks. Contractors fail to use multi-factor authentication, strong enforced password use, and identify and mitigate vulnerabilities or document and track cybersecurity incidents. Second is vaccine implementation. Gurman 21 writes that secret agreements with private companies to illegally obtain customers' communications has only raised public skepticism about integrity in our government. Government trust is a prerequisite to vaccine implementation, as Glennon 14 writes that when the elements of the national security apparatus deceive Congress, they feed the perception that the whole system is rigged. People who doubt the government officials' assertions on national security are inclined to extend their skepticism to vaccines. Vaccines save lives. That's why trust in the government is so key, as Regal 19 writes that in the US alone, 21 million hospitalizations and 732,000 deaths will be avoided among children because of vaccines. All right, guys, ready for cross?
Yeah, we'll run a little prep here.
Okay.
Okay, that was like 10 seconds. I'm good for cross if you are.
Yeah, good. You get first question.
Okay. So on your C2 on the vaccine impact, you say that like secret agreements between private companies have like raised skepticism about the integrity in government. So like these private agreements have already been created, right?
Yeah, our argument is that it just gets so much world under the F.
So like how much worse? Like how many more people don't get their vaccine because there's like 15 more agreements?
Yeah, so obviously I don't have a specific number for that. You can't like really measure distrust. Our argument specifically is that when they start to outsource to private companies, the general American population do not trust these private companies, which means they're less likely to take vaccines. Can I get a question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On internet freedom, so you say that since we're losing our leverage, this causes proxy wars, specifically because of the NSA. What proxy wars have like started?
I mean, it's hard to isolate like a specific proxy where that has occurred, right? Because there's probably a lot of reasons. But what our evidence indicates is that a lack of democracies is what has triggered proxy wars. But what has caused a lack of democracy is the NSA.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so on your argument on the C1, you say there's been like a 238% increase in banks. So why didn't the NSA like attribute these attacks and prevent them?
Yeah, so our argument about attribution is not stopping attacks. It's specifically saying that the threshold of the attack is much smaller. That's why even though there's a 238% increase in the attacks, the damage wasn't enough to cause our impact. Can I
Right, so like what sort of attack has to occur for your impact to happen?
Yeah, so the Roman evidence. So obviously, like once again, it's like cyber attacks are evolving every single day. So we'd say like maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, there's a more sophisticated type of hack. But we say that this wouldn't happen because we're able to deter. Can I get a question?
Mm-hmm.
So on Iran, your uniqueness evidence is from 2013. So when is this miscalculation going to happen?
The uniqueness evidence is from 2013, but it says the problem is only getting worse. We can't say like miscalculation happens tomorrow, obviously.
But there's always tensions within the region of
Yeah.
what they release. So like, why is the NSA misinformation like unique?
Because if the NSA tells Israel Iran intends to nuclear strike them, then Israel's probably going to preemptively strike because of that.
Can I get a follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
So how does like collecting domestic data help Israel, or like deter
Sure,
Israel.
it's the argument that young evidence that makes that like analysts can't pick out what intel is good because they're sifting through so much domestic data. So like we send data to Israel, we can't send the right data because we're spending all of our time sifting through like your neighbor's data. So on your argument about C2 circumvention, so you say that we've like really outsourced data, like the priest evidence says that the majority is already outsourced, and like we're on the trend now.
Yeah.
So like, doesn't this not unique your case? If we're on the trend towards outsourcing now, then like, what's the impact?
So our argument specifically is that it gets worse in the early affirmative world. Our evidence indicates like 60% of the budget has started to shift towards private contracting. But our argument specifically is that when you affirm and you get rid of the NSA, it'd be 100%. That's what causes.
But it seems like it's going to be 100% anyway. I mean, your priest evidence says there's been a massive shift towards outsourcing.
Priest evidence is from 2013. Our other piece of evidence is from 2019. And it's slowly increasing. We don't think it'd get 100% unless you immediately remove the NSA, which gives the government no other option but then to shift to private contracts.
What's the like 2019 evidence that says
Yeah.
like...
Give me one second.
Okay.
It's the PI. Sorry, 20.
All right. We will run prep.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
That was a minute 15 there.
You've used a minute 25 total, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just going to be down the nug. Let's start in their first contention about cyber operations. First off, they read uniqueness in the wrong direction. Per their own evidence, there's been a 230% increase in cyber operations, which proves that the NSA is failing to do its job. Even their own evidence says that attacks are increasing in severity, which means that the big attack is going to be coming. Also, the quantum encryption uniqueness in our case means that the reason a big attack hasn't happened is because the technology isn't good enough. When the technology improves, then the big attack will happen. Second, hackers are circumventing this surveillance. Riley21 writes that hackers managing their intrusion and theft of data within the US itself avoid NSA surveillance and screening. Third, you can turn it. NSA actions set aggressive norms. Farrell15 writes that states use the Snowden revelations as opposition to any rules Washington might offer. In light of Snowden, the US is poorly placed to dissuade other actors of its good faith, empirically with North Korea's attack on Sony. On their attribution link. First, other actors can do attribution. Farrell18 writes that the FBI officially attributed an attack to North Korea, and the private sector actors subsequently confirmed the FBI's attribution. The NSA isn't the only one with these capabilities. Second, deterrence fails even with attribution. Chevis17 writes that even where an attack is linked to one specific country, it could be hard to know whether it was by the government. Governments like Russia rely on third parties to conduct their attacks. Should the US use conventional weapons, that would risk serious escalation. Even if the US knew with a high degree of confidence, there would be reasons for caution. Third, cyber deterrence doesn't work. Morel18 writes that using our capabilities to attack the attacker is often not that effective because of the ease with which adversaries can move from one server to another. On their second link about AI, first, most AI is being developed by the private sector. ERI20 writes that for cybersecurity, the private sector invests the largest amount of resources into artificial intelligence. It's so non-unique. Second, you can turn it. We improve the alliance with Silicon Valley through improved trust that they're not being spied on. That's especially important for AI, as Arnold20 writes that the private sector is in command of nations and they rely on private companies to build AI software. The United States is no exception. On their second contention about circumvention, First, this is a mostly defensive argument, but it doesn't take our arguments about perception away, because people perceptually are especially afraid of the NSA because of things like the Snowden revelations. Second, all of their evidence is about the military and foreign intelligence, not domestic. It's completely different sectors with different nuances. Third, they're getting the story wrong. The NSA is the status quo and gets their data from private companies now. The Taro 19, their own evidence finds that a great deal of the NSA's monitoring originates within the data centers and telecommunications networks of the world's private corporations. Under the res, we remove the agency paying these companies to give over that data. They have no reason to do so otherwise. Fourth, this also means that the argument is terminally non-unique. The government already outsources to the private sector massively, so all of their impacts should already be happening. Fifth, contractors don't want to work for the NSA. Nakashima 18 finds that the agency continues to face public distrust after revelations by Snowden in 2013. Morale dipped in the aftermath and is not recovered. Restrictions on accessing data have made work more difficult. If these contractors aren't being forced to work for the government, they're going to choose not to. And the only reason that they are now is because their own evidence says that they're being compelled to do so. And the NSA is literally hacking their data to get this info from the private contractors. They don't have to do it if you take out the NSA. On their impact about cyber defense. First, this is non-unique. The NSA already has tons of cyber weapons leaking from the system. Pearlwrath 19 writes the NSA tools have been picked up by hackers around the world, leaving billions of dollars in damage over hospitals, airports, and factories. Just look at the Snowden leaks. The NSA has had the exact same problem they say private sector would have. Second, you can turn it. A greater alliance with the private sector is better for building cyber defenses. We already win on that on the cyber operations. On vaccines. First, it's so non-unique. Private agreements have already been made with surveillance and with vaccine production if you either trust the government or you don't. Second, the impact is supercharged. Per their own evidence, it's a max of like 42,000 people. Third, you can turn it because surveillance hurts vaccine confidence. Watley 20 writes the theories have circulated about vaccines, such as the fear that the injection will contain surveillance microchips. Fourth, you can turn it because the government is monopolizing the data, making it less effective. King 20 writes that the CDC uses models provided by Google to project its spread. However, this data has been strictly the purview of governments. If you allow the entire private sector to access that data, you'll get much more efficient vaccine and pandemic responses.
All right, can I call for a couple pieces of evidence?
I'll send the entire speech doc.
Okay, cool.
I just need to like cut out the stuff I didn't.
Yeah, all good.
It's sent.
Cool. I'll let you know when I get it.
Okay, cool. I just got it. Emma, did you get it?
Okay, yeah, I just got it too. We'll start.
I'll hold on my timer when we start. That was 54.
Cool. There's no way. Cool. Let me just pull up my timer in my doc. Okay. It's going to start on our case. Is everyone ready?
Are you just starting at the top of your case?
Yeah. Cool. In that case, time starts now. The first response doesn't make sense. The AI hasn't been implemented yet, meaning once the AI is implemented, that's when we see the success. But second, when they're trying to talk about holistic circumvention to avoid attacks, that's only one specific example. Their actual argument isn't talking about the entirety of all of NSA surveillance, meaning we're still able to stop attacks. But then third, when they're talking about all of this like opposition to US norms, this isn't actually true. The US is actually in an alliance with up to 27 other nations specifically sharing intelligence, meaning that obviously we still have a role here and we're still able to set norms. On the whole attribution thing, we'll concede the non-unique that private sector can do it, kicking out of everything on that. On the AI specifically, first, they're trying to say that the AI is private. There's 4 reasons why you're going to prefer the NSA. First, the resource doesn't mean you're having a successful AI being developed for the cyber defense. But second, the NSA is actual national, meaning we'll actually have more large-scale attacks. Third, we're actually having more data specifically because we are national. And fourth, because we're talking about specific precedent, the NSA protecting the financial sector, it means that you know the AI is going to be actually implemented in a good spot. Then, when they're trying to say it only increases the alliance of the private sector, one, obviously the AI is being developed right now. We aren't seeing any of these issues, but second, our Schreiner evidence actually establishes that what's happening is the NSA is actually increasing the amount of trust between the U.S. Government and the private sectors, meaning we're solving for all this like private control now. We'll concede that our second contention is also non-unique. On the turns at the very bottom when they're talking about how like there's an alliance and we're only going to be decreasing the amount of trust, just realize that this is also non-unique. The microchips isn't specific because of the U.S. That's another surveillance concern. Even if you get rid of the NSA, you're not ever going to solve for that concern in the other surveillance organizations. But then second, when they're trying to say that like there's a monopolization of the data, meaning it's less effective, that's not an NSA specific issue. That's a government specific issue, considering the NSA wasn't even involved in data collection on this pandemic, meaning that that also doesn't like have any materialization. The turn doesn't have any elephants. On their case, starting in the contention one, talking about Iran. There's a couple of issues here. First, the NSA is already solving the overloading problem. First, Rothman 16 of the New Yorker finds that the NSA is developing another program called ThinThread, which does quick analysis of information and throws away searches that don't belong in what they're looking for, solving for the overloading problem. Second, Vavra 19 finds the NSA is actually looking for a way to expand the AI to actually solve back. Third, there's other databases, including Gallagher explaining the Accumulo database can generate nearly real-time reports and actually solve for all of these issues, meaning that we're able to actually go through information quickly. On the impact level, this is also not true for a couple of reasons. One, the Tehran Times 20 finds that the FBI has actually been sending signals intelligence. That's not going to go away. You're still going to have that. But second, the Iran themselves, as Zerg 16 finds, or sorry, Israel themselves already has their own system, not only with these signals intelligence, but also with on the ground, actually a mass system of checkpoints and physical surveillance, meaning that they're always going to have the surveillance. They're never actually going to have an attack, meaning that their impact is never going to materialize. Even then, Keck finds that there's, because of the risk of retaliation and the risk of alienating the U.S. because of a war, it's never actually going to like escalate to 7 million dying. On EU dying, the EU trade, there's a couple of issues. First, their own evidence only lists the NSA as an example of surveillance that the EU doesn't like, meaning because the EU still has backdoors, other intelligence and other organizations, they're always going to have this link being triggered. But even then, the EU rejection isn't final for 3 reasons. One, Goodwin finds just 2 months ago, the EU Commission is currently outlining data sharing contracts called SCCs with US businesses to provide legal clarity, meaning you're already seeing solvency now. But second, this is actually an outdated portrayal. As Campbell 20 of The Guardian writes, the EU is now investing heavily into their own surveillance technologies, no longer holding the same norms. In fact, Gallagher 18 of The Intercept writes, the NSA is already in an alliance for spying right now with 17 other European countries. Obviously, there's no issue here. On the impact level, that also doesn't have any solvency as well. The EU is a member of at least 11 different agreements dealing with medical data and disease cures. There's no reason why the US specifically is key, and the US is also part of these alliances in the first place. On specifically on cryptocurrency, a couple of issues here. First, investment isn't even going to happen in the first place, as Pete 17, the IFRA, finds that Bitcoin is on a bubble and will correct in the long term, even if it sees some short-term gains. In fact, when you look to the reasons why people aren't actually investing in Bitcoin, Tepper of Forbes writes that the Bitcoin investment value is one, at an all-time high with the NSA not having any issues in the first place, but two, the people who are actually like at risk and not going to be investing in the first place are people who don't invest in the stock market in the first place and who are deterred by the fact that like Bitcoin is a vulnerable system, meaning that there's never actually going to have any like this like solvency on the Bitcoin. Then on quantum cryptography, a couple of issues here. First, this actually makes the Fermi makes the cybersecurity market better, as GVR20 finds the cybersecurity market actually was only increasing the encryption standard specifically in response to NSA surveillance as a way to say that, hey, I'm responding to the surveillance. It's actually like keeping their data safer. Even then, Schreiner 20 writes in October, the NSA is actually starting to rebuild trust with the private sector and reveal these backdoors. On the final one, talking about data localization, one, the NSA isn't specific to all of the authoritarian impulses from the US, as Backer 20 of Freedom Lab finds that all of our like current events have actually led to a bunch of issues there as well. But second, China is a bigger issue, as Shabazz 18 of Freedom House finds that other countries are moving towards digital authoritarianism by embracing the Chinese model, meaning even absent NSA surveillance, China will always be there as a fill-in. Cool. Good for Cross? Or do you need any evidence, actually?
Yeah, can we just see your whole speech doc?
Yeah.
They're not cut cards. It's pretty much all paraphrase. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, that's
I get,
fine.
if that's what you
Like-
have like available.
We'd
Yeah.
prefer
Yeah, I
like
mean, we
cut
have all
cards
the
at the
cards.
bottom,
Just
but
like if you want me to send the cards for every single thing, you'll have to give me a second to pull them all.
you can send like
Here,
like
can we
yeah,
say
yeah,
the
just-
doc, and then if you have like if you
Yeah.
need
yeah, do that.
Yeah,
That's-
just
that's
send the
best.
doc, but I know I'm going to need the cut card for the GBR and Schneider.
I'll send
Schneider
you
evidence.
Schneider now.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Cool.
We'll start cross when Gus gets those cards.
Okay.
I just sent GVR and Schneider. Let me know when you get them.
Yep, for sure.
Cool. And then Doc should be sending now too.
Okay, y'all can do cross once I've got them.
Okay. Since I went first, can I take the first
Wait,
question?
Henry, I haven't gotten the second thing yet.
It says it's sent, so just let me know.
Okay, yeah, we can just start. So you say that you're stopping the biggest attacks, but you do agree that there are several large, severe attacks that have cost companies lots of money, right? And like they've been attacking the government, right?
No, I agree that like we haven't obviously solved for 100% of cybersecurity issues, but I would say that because we're solving for some of like the key ones, that's why we haven't specifically seen our impact materialize. Like if you
Right,
want to
but,
give me
like,
multiple
you-
examples of like where a like attack on the financial sector has risked this like impact scenario, that's fine. But like at the point, you can't just say, hey, there's been cyber attacks. Like without
What
giving me
I'm
good
asking
examples.
is like your Shang evidence agrees with the analysis of the fact that like recent attacks have compromised like the Department of Defense and Department of Commerce and like the Federal Reserve, which are like large banking institutions you say the NSA is protecting. So if large institutions like the Department of Commerce can be infiltrated like per your own evidence, why would the NSA allow that if they had the technology to stop those attacks?
Yeah, a couple things. One, the first thing is that these haven't been like wide scale attacks that are causing like the mass harms that's leading in our impact scenario. Just because they like have access to the system doesn't mean they're causing like massive harm. Second, we say that the AI itself hasn't actually been implemented. It will take like a matter of a couple more months if you want to like see any time frame evidence. It hasn't been completely implemented yet. If you want to look into like the probability evidence that we read in our case, the most that like current cybersecurity like initiatives can do with NSA or without is like 80% of all attacks being like found and stopped. With the AI specifically, what we actually end up getting is this 100% success rate. And on top of that, the VAVR evidence establishes you get like this self-healing network where you're able to respond to it more effectively.
Okay.
So
You
I
can
would say
take a
like
question.
uniqueness doesn't matter, it's a future tense issue. Sure. So when we're specifically talking about how like, like democracy is supposed to lead to like mass proxy wars. Why is the United States uniquely like the pillar of democracy that everyone is following? Why can't another country do that?
Because the Kell evidence is very specific that the United States has extremely large leverage power, both because we have the world's largest economy and the world's largest military, right?
Okay, cool.
So countries
Neither
don't
of
want
those
to
are related
increase.
to surveillance, right?
The point is, because we are hypocritical with our surveillance, then we cannot tell other countries, hey, you should stop your surveillance, because they can just go, but you're doing it too. So then
Cool.
the
In that
international
case, if we're
community
just
can't
talking about
pressure other countries.
surveillance-based, oh, sorry, go ahead.
the international community in the United States cannot do things like sanction or like do tariffs or like put international pressure on these countries because they're being hypocritical. And like the international community would be like, what are you doing? You're like
Gotcha. So the
doing things
hypocrisy is
against this country.
specific to data-specific policies. Can you give me an example when a data-specific like hypocrisy from the United States prevented us from stopping a proxy war?
Well,
Because I
the
would say
reason
most proxy wars, like US influence on data sharing or like surveillance, isn't what's going to be causing that proxy war or impeding us from involving ourselves.
You're like missing the next part of the link, which is the Fontaine evidence, which says that when there is improved internet freedom and improved less surveillance on like people's internet, then they're able to better communicate and better improve like democratic like uprisings
Okay,
against
so
their authoritarian
quick
governments.
clarification, there's like two levels. One is people don't like to listen to the United States because like we're hypocrites. And then the second is like just internet freedom in general across the world is like an issue that leads to like less conflict.
Yeah, like there's a link in the internal link. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds.
Okay, we'll run prep. We used a minute 28 before. All right, stop prep. That was a minute 35. So we got about like 5 or 10 seconds remaining. It's going to go the AF way, then go to the neg. Is everyone ready?
Where are you starting on the AF?
Frontlining the turn on our C3. And then I'll talk about my C4 and way. Then there's that. Okay. On the turn on our C3, we agree that investment is an all-time that gets out of like the bubble turn. On our quantum computing argument, extend the Norris evidence that pretty soon all information is going to be compromised because of the quantum computing can break any encryption. That's because of the NSA, specifically the second link on standards. What the Landau evidence is that the NIST sets encryption standards for the entire private sector, but what the NSA does is it lobbies and uses its influence to undermine the standards and make the standards really bad so it can instill surveillance technology. The Vasani evidence says that this cyber attacks could disrupt entire financial markets, pushing 90 million people. It's the same impact story as their case. They say with this turn that like affirming would like collapse the cybersecurity market. Not a single piece of their evidence indicates that it would have any sort of effect on the cybersecurity market. Secondly, this relies on the fact that people think their information is safe. No one thinks their intelligence is safe. People do not believe that the NSA has stopped spying, that their intel is not with the NSA. There's always going to be an incentive for encryption technology because people want to protect themselves from the government or cyber criminals. That's why VPNs are so popular. They say with this backdoors response that people like give a warning before backdoors. It's not responsive to our second link about using their lobbying influence for the NIST specifically. Even if they warn companies that backdoors are getting implemented, that doesn't respond to the fact that the encryption standard overall has been weakened. So they create backdoors and really bad encryption that doesn't respond to our case. The reason this outweighs their cyber case is for two reasons. First, it's a prerequisite. Today's strategy is not good enough. Our Torsk evidence says that pretty soon cyber attacks will increase exponentially. That's because they're training the AI on the bad encryption standards. They're training the AI use the bad encryption standards that the NSA sent. So even if you train the NSA, it's not effective. The AI, it's not effective because of the bad encryption standards. The second outweighs on probability. The uniqueness is not on their side. There's been a 273% increase in hacks. There should have been like AI should be solving. They say like AI hasn't been implemented yet, so it like hasn't happened, but like it should be getting better as it gets implemented. That's not happening, obviously, on their side. Again, the uniqueness probably proves that AI is not effective. That's because of the evidence we read that, again, the AI doesn't work because you're training it on the bad encryption technology. That's why encryption is a prerequisite issue. Extend the Farrell evidence. States avoid norms, like because of Snowden disclosures, states do not follow our norms because they view us as illegitimate. They say that the U.S. is in an alliance with 27 nations, but our adversaries are not in the alliance. This is a prerequisite issue because we create bad norms that encourages cyber adversaries to attack us in the first place, which is a prerequisite because we don't need defense if they're not attacking us in the second place. And second outweighs on severity because these encourage big nation state attacks. Cyber criminals don't follow norms. However, places like North Korea do, which creates really bad norms. The second thing you can extend is the area evidence that says that for cybersecurity, private sector is the #1 investment, which means they're doing it a lot. They say that it's not proven to be successful. Yes, in other countries, it's proven to be successful. They said that the NSA is national, but banks will adopt the cybersecurity technology the private sector develops if it's good. They say that more data is better, but Google has lots of data, and they say that AI is good. But again, our evidence says in other countries, AI is being the #1 development. Prefer us because it's in other countries, and our evidence says it's the #1 investment into cybersecurity defense.
All right, cool. Can I call for your internal link, the NIST thing?
Yeah. It's just in the case.
All right. Which card?
Well, it's just under the second link, called undermining standards. That's the Landau evidence.
Landau. All right, cool. Once I hold up my timer, we'll start prepping. All right. I had 153 there, so 153 plus 54. Someone can do the math there. All right. It'll go their C4, their Wang, and then AI. Is everyone ready? All right. I'll take that as a yes. On quantum encryption, they mishandle the first response we give you. Our argument is that affirming makes cybersecurity worse because it collapses the cybersecurity market, and more importantly, encryption technology goes down. The GVR evidence indicates that the cybersecurity market is valued at a very high and it's set to grow. However, the Greenwald implication explains that surveillance reform tricks the public into thinking their data is safe, which destroys the market for encryption technology. They say that we don't have any evidence. Look at the Greenwald evidence. Then they say that the info is safe right now. That's specifically our argument. The Greenwald evidence is indicating that the public thinks that their data is safe, which inherently decreases trust within the encryption technology. on their way. First, they say that they outweigh on prereq because like over time, exponentially attacks get worse. What Pisani finds is that what the AI system actually does is it continuously gathers data. It's not just one data set that they gather and they create a bot. They continuously gather data. So as cyber attacks are also getting more severe, that means the AI can still track them down. But second, we say that you wouldn't want to reverse years of progress in developing this bot, so their prereq really doesn't matter. Then they say they outweigh on probability. No, they don't. Our argument is future tense. Yes, there are attacks right now, but one, it hasn't triggered our impact, but two, the AI hasn't been developed yet. That's why they've conceded the Siegel evidence, which indicates that AI is a 100% threat detection rate, which means we inherently solve back for their case and our case. Let's go to our case. Our argument is very simple. In the growing world of cyber attacks, we need a new way to protect ourselves. Luckily, the NSA analyzes baseline behavior of user accounts, endpoints, and servers and identifies anomalous behavior through its surveillance to develop an AI bot, which our evidence indicates can predict 100% of all attacks. This is completely conceded. It is critical that we have this bot because an attack to our financial sector would collapse the banking industry, which puts the US economy at a frenzy because of a lack of consumer trust and no banks. Ultimately, this economic shock would put 900 million people into poverty because the US is the global economic linchpin, which means that when it suffers, the entire world suffers. Let's go to their responses. First, they try to say they link in with standards. There's a lot of problems with this. One, they don't tell you what the standard actually is. They don't tell you specifically how the standards affects the AI. Second, we say that the AI is trained on data sets. It's not trained on standards. We look at data that's happening within the banks, and the continuous stream of data is what stops the attacks in the first place. But third, we say that adversaries are linking in with like our cybersecurity agreements. For example, in 2019, Russia and the United States signed a one-year deal on cybersecurity. This clearly proves that their total evidence doesn't really matter. The second piece of defense that they extend is this ERI evidence that indicates that AI is being developed through the private sector. However, they have no carded analysis that actually responds to Emma's frontlines. Our argument from Vavra specifically isolates that the NSA is the one providing the most amount of data and the most continuous stream of data. They say that Google provides a lot of data, but one, it's not as much as the NSA, but two, it's not as continuous as the NSA. Also, you wouldn't want to reverse years worth of progress. They themselves tell you that the imminent threat of cyber attacks is happening right now, which means you wouldn't want to get rid of the AI. We're outweighing first on solvency because we say that the Vavra evidence also indicates that we have a self-healing network, which means that AI inherently solves back for their case. Two reasons why we outweigh. First is solvency, because we both agree that the encryption, cybersecurity is getting much worse. So we have to solve back for that. The only way that happens is through AI. But second is on uniqueness, because we specifically isolate the NSA is the one creating this bot, whereas their argument has other factors into it.
You
Okay,
guys get the cross?
Yeah. So let's like clear up. You say like this with your evidence that like AI can stop 100% of attacks, right?
Yeah.
What does your evidence actually say?
100% detection rate.
Yeah, detection rate. So it can tell if it's getting hacked, but that doesn't mean it stops the attack, right?
Yeah. So first, if you
Okay.
look to like what the actual analysis of the evidence is saying, it's saying that's the important first step because it allows for a really quick response from the actual private company. If you can't figure out what the attack is, you can't respond. There's other response mechanisms. Second, our Vavra evidence that Shreyas extends in the really like late half of his summary establishes that not only is this AI 100% detection rate, it's creating a quote unquote self-healing system, meaning it's not just detecting, it's detecting and solving.
Right.
Pretty good question.
We think it's a little bad that you framed it as 100% stopping rate when it's actually detection and all those warrants weren't in summary. The second argument is, do you
Okay.
think it's better to not get hacked in the first place or the network to like heal itself after you've been hacked?
First, okay, well, I'll address both of them in order then. First, when you're trying to say it's really bad norms, one, Shreyas does establish the Vavra evidence in summary. I also establish it as a frontline in rebuttal. If you want to look back to the case evidence, we don't just say 100% effectiveness rate and move on. No, the importance of that 100% effectiveness rate is actually established to how this means you get really fast responses to cyber attacks because you're able to find them in the first place. We're not just saying that 100% card is like solvency for everything. We do have warranting there. When you want to look to the second part, you're saying that like overall, like you're still going to have like attacks going in the first place. I would say that encryption standards are not the sole reason why all attacks are happening, meaning that even if you're contributing to an attack with this encryption standard, it means that even if you solve for this, there's still going to be massive harms through either like backdoor or like vulnerabilities that already exist in code, these other like actors just trying in general to do it, meaning that like overall, if you want to talk about solvency, you only get a portion of all cyber attacks.
I mean, we obviously disagree because our evidence indicates that like the standards that have been set is what allows the rise of quantum computing, i.e. without the NSA breaking the NIST like encryption technology, we would be prepared to deal with like cybersecurity. Like our evidence says the NIST is solely responsible for standards.
Yeah,
do
being
you want a
solely
question?
responsible for standards doesn't mean it's solely responsible for every single cyber attack that happens to get through those standards. Nothing is perfect.
I mean, your also evidence also doesn't say you stop attacks, just that like the network heals itself after it's been attacked. But you can have a question.
I mean, you can't exactly heal something that hasn't been exploited yet.
Right.
Like if someone goes into the system, being able to
But-
fix it after someone has gone into it is really important.
Right, but like the point is that in our world, they never get into the system. Your solvency only happens after attacks have already occurred.
Yeah, but you can't solve for something that hasn't happened yet.
Well, that's the like you can encrypt, you can build defensive measures which stop the attack before they happen. That's our point, is that like you can't solve for something that hasn't happened yet, whereas we can.
Okay, I mean, we'll contest that, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
But-
Do you want a question?
That's basically cross.
All right. We'll run our last like 10.
Okay. It's going to be the AF, then our weighing and their weighing, then the neg. Extend our argument about quantum encryption. The Norris evidence finds that quantum computing is going to be able to crack all encryption and like get inside all companies and governments around the world. And the Lando evidence finds that the NSA is allowing this threat to be extremely bad because the NIST sets encryption standards for the entire private sector across the world. And those standards are being ruined by the NSA so that the NSA can more easily hack into everyone's systems, causing a recession that pulls 90 million people into poverty. It's the same impact as them. Their only response in summary is the Greenwald evidence, which says that surveillance reform tricks the public into thinking they don't need encryption. They drop Gus's frontline. First, people will never believe that they will be safe from surveillance because they'll either think that Facebook is trying to spy on them or the CIA is trying to spy on them. That's why things like VPNs and encryption are so popular in the status quo. That demand doesn't go away. Second, companies and governments around the world know that quantum computing is a threat. This only applies to domestic encryption demand. As long as international actors want quantum encryption and they're using the NIST standards, they're going to be extremely vulnerable to massive quantum attacks that cripple the economy. Extend the prereq weighing from Totsky, which says that AI training is training on weakened encryption, which means that the AI will be inherently bad. They say that it's continuous data sets. It's bad data sets, meaning it's bad AI. Then they say that we reverse years of progress. It's bad progress, which is why we should reverse it. They say they outweigh on solvency because cyber attacks are getting worse. That's good for us because it means the NSA is failing, but also we solve for that because we allow for better encryption. They say that our argument isn't unique. The NSA is weakening encryption for the entire world, which means that it is very unique. On their side, you can extend the Farrell turn, which says that states don't follow our good cyber norms because they see us as an illegitimate actor in the cyberspace due to the Snowden disclosures and NSA surveillance. They say that we have an alliance with Russia. We don't have an alliance with countries like Iran and North Korea. This outweighs on a prerequisite because we don't need defense if we're not being protected, and on magnitude because nation states do the biggest attacks. Finally, the ERA evidence says that the private sector is the #1 at collecting data to train AI. So it's probably a wash since ours says ours is #1, theirs is #1. It's like probably the same.
All right, we have like 11 seconds left. I'll hold up my timer when we start that.
All right. Sorry, 1 second. Cool. Is everyone ready? Awesome. I'll take that as a yes. I'm gonna go our case swing throughout. That case time starts now. First, when you actually look to the Greenwald evidence, when we're talking about when there's actual encryption standards, it means that because you're not going to even have like as much of a threat because the NSA is one of the most publicized threats, it means that you're not ever going to have this incentive to do so. You're going to have less encryption standards. You're going to have less actual efforts by private companies, meaning that even if you believe there's always going to be other threats, the NSA is taking away a really, really big one, meaning that overall encryption will still go down. That when they're trying to say that like quantum computing is a really big threat globally and overall there's like this prereq, they're not actually fundamentally understanding how this AI development actually works. When you do AI, you're not training it on standards. You're not training it on like data and like interception in the first place. You're trading on simply how everyone is interacting with the internet. That means that domestic surveillance and how people are interacting on the internet means that even with these really bad standards, if you believe that these standards are bad, what happens is we're able to figure out when those bad standards are actually being used for a cyber attack, meaning we're the only side who's actually able to find these attacks, respond to them, and actually have solvency for the issue. Even if you don't have these bad standards, there's always going to be other actors who are going to be infiltrating and doing cyber attacks. Just because these standards exist doesn't mean there's not going to be vulnerabilities that exist in the systems in the first place, meaning there's always going to be this on-net threat, meaning that when you actually look to the weighing, they're never going to have 100% of the probability or 100% of the scope of the impact, because they're only ever talking about cyber attacks that come from a very minute sector of the actual cybersecurity industry. Then when we actually go to our case, you're going to be voting for us off of our cybersecurity contention. Our argument is that the NSA collects these massive hordes of data. It's going to be developing this AI bot, which overall is going to be able to detect 100% of cyber attacks. Our VAVA evidence establishes that because of the NSA's development, specifically, this is going to be creating a self-healing network, overall not only being able to find these attacks, but also stop them before they have any really big impact. This is important because the technology improves cyber attacks in our financial sector would actually cause a run on the banks, putting the U.S. into a recession with spills over, pushing 900 million people into poverty. The important thing is this is perceptionally, because we actually have the ability to respond in the first place, and we have the self-healing network. It means that overall, we're the ones who are actually preventing the impact from materializing. They don't even extend an impact throughout this entire round. Their only response is talking about how these adversaries are not in these alliances in the first place. One, we've already proven that adversaries are starting to join these alliances. Two, the majority of our allies are in these alliances. Three, if they're not joined by now, there's not really anything the U.S. can do, meaning that we are deterring the majority of the attacks already. And on top of that, when you actually have this cybersecurity bot being able to develop, it means that even if these other states are going to attack us in the first place, what happens is we're able to find this attack, stop it before it has any impact, and overall mean that we don't ever trigger the impact scenario. And their ERI, when you specifically look to the ERI evidence, it's only one example. When you look to what's happening in the United States, specifically with our Siegel and our VAVR and our Corrigan evidence, it's a better example than just one random card.
Good round, yeah.
Yeah, good round.
You're on that.
Good round.